When you boot up a video game, the first thing you see is the game's presentation as you navigate through the menus and start it. This menu creates a response within you, whether you are conscious of it or not. As games try to create a successful horror experience, the presentation is the player's first and last impression as it permeates throughout the game and works as a foundation for all the other aspects. So today we are going to begin our analysis of horror games by starting with the most important but probably the least appreciated aspect of horror: presentation. When we talk about the presentation of a video game, it is made up of three major concepts that act as a pillar of the foundation being laid out. They are the graphical style, the user interface, and the audio design. This trio works together to bring the audience in, and by establishing this foundation, it allows the other aspects of horror to shine later. So with all that laid out, let's jump in and start with the graphical style of a game and how it plays a role. When you are playing a game, you are always inferring what you see and reacting accordingly. The way the visuals are represented play a role on how we perceive horrors by determining how much is left to imagination or thrown right at us. In many games spanning from retro to indie, the pixelated or low fidelity graphics are used to muddle the ability of the audience to see the full features of the creatures, characters, and environments around them. This is used to hide flaws or low production value in some cases, but when it is done correctly, it is used to make the audience use their imagination to fill the blanks created by the muddled graphics. This is in the advantage of the game designer because the genre of horror usually makes your imagination dive deep into your worst fears as your brain bridges the gaps. Some games that come to mind that do this well are Home, a short indie horror game that uses the minimal design to help tell its deceivingly elaborate story; Silent Hill, the classic which used fog to combat draw distance due to the poor performance of the PlayStation 1; and Resident Evil, which pioneered the survival horror genre of video games and has one of the most iconic scenes of all entertainment media. Contrast to lower fidelity graphical direction, there are many games that try their best to be grounded in realism by using photorealistic graphics. These games try to captivate audiences by drawing them in with something that feels like they are there. This uses more true visuals rather than the low fidelity and pixelated counterparts. This was something that was experimented with as video games evolved over time and has come very close to the real thing. Until Dawn comes to mind, which uses the cinematic look and dramatic visuals to scare the audience. And a game like The Last of Us, which uses high-tech motion capture to bring a human story to a horror landscape. Most games will fall in the middle of this range as they try to use a combination of both to be successful, as trying to hit the photorealistic graphics that Supermassive Games or Naughty Dog are producing cost outlandish amounts of money. On the other hand, going with a minimalistic route can have the audience miss out on critical information as the ability to discern graphical elements is highly compromised. Now that you've gotten in the game and have tried to discern the visuals that are in front of you, you pause the game to reflect, and the next aspect of presentation becomes apparent. You unpause, you hear a sound that broke the silence, and you look around. You then instinctually look at your health bar, then at your ammo, if you have any. The user interface plays a major role when you're playing, as the player relies on it to display important information. The user interface is made up of the heads-up display, or the HUD on screen, and the menus that need to be navigated to play the game. Though many games in recent history have chose to remove more and more elements of a HUD, certain games like the controversy-laden Manhunt chose to have a HUD that even included a minimap. Evil Within's HUD is on screen while the player is in danger, but follows the previously mentioned trend and disappears when not needed. Other games though will have what we call low-profile HUDs. The prominent example of this concept comes from Visceral Games' Dead Space. They made the decision that the protagonist Isaac Clarke would have his health and other supply bars on his back rather than on screen. This means you can see your health and ammo at all times when you're playing, but it feels more organic than a traditional HUD. Some games have taken to get rid of a HUD altogether though. One game that does a great job at this is Resident Evil 7. There are games before in this series that did not have a heads-up display, but Capcom decided to add them as their games evolved. Then Part 7 came out, and for numerous reasons it threw the series on its head. With the change of perspective came the removal of the HUD, as the game throws you in with nothing on screen and definitely works in the favor as the game scares you more. Most video games have more complex skills and abilities that stack up, having the games have multiple layers. This means that not only does the heads-up display need to convey information reliably, but the menu needs to be easy to navigate also. When you're playing games that have inventory management or skill trees, you're going to want to know exactly what you're dealing with and be able to find things easily. This is something when designed well falls into the background, but when designed badly can completely be jarring and negative to the whole experience. Two good examples of this are the aforementioned Dead Space series and Resident Evil series. Though the two series have user interfaces completely different, they both do them very well. With Dead Space, the system is casted directly from Isaac and very easy to navigate, which works well with the very hectic nature of the game. Resident Evil, on the other hand, chooses to make a separate menu with very distinguishable inventory slots, a health meter, and other tabs that are easy to navigate and find information. Both interfaces are extensions of the world that the games are trying to create, with Dead Space a very quick and survivalistic style versus Resident Evil, which is a very methodical and deliberate feel on horror. There's a final concept that makes up the presentation of a video game, and you are listening to it. The soundstage that a video game uses can make or break how well the game does at captivating, creeping out, or scaring the audience. A lot of times, the soundscape will help the audience with knowing how to feel, so if this music does not hit home, it comes off as distracting and destructive to the overall experience. When you look for a good example of this, Dead Space again comes up. The soundtrack is a major reason why, as it does a great job at conveying danger and ramping up anticipation as you move through the silent and isolated corridors. There's also a great amount of work put into the ambient noise of the game, as it also keeps you on your toes when there's nothing around, at least you think. Another great example of this would be Silent Hill. The soundtrack immediately hits you, making you uncomfortable before you even get to start playing. It definitely gives you a serious impression of what to expect from the game. Once you are actually playing the game, the music, and sometimes the lack thereof, plays a huge role in making the player feel uncomfortable. There's also a good use of static, which makes the hairs on your neck stand up. So these are the three major concepts that come together to make up the presentation of a horror game. Keep in mind there is no set combination of these concepts that come together to make a horror game. We've covered games with vastly different combinations of presentation, from games like Home and Silent Hill to Evil Within and Until Dawn. There are many more combinations and maybe even some we haven't seen before, so make sure to keep an eye out. So with all that presented, this is where this part of the journey ends. But stick around for the next video where we jump into the setting of horror games and see how they can play a role on bringing the player in and how it strengthens the foundation laid out by the game's presentation. So I hope to see you then.